Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for our very special live stream event on the topic of crushing the ivory market here in New York City. So what does it take to close an ivory market in a big city like New York? Well, you're going to find out tonight when you hear from our amazing panel of speakers, each who've used their unique skills and background and expertise to fight the illegal wildlife trade, protecting elephants and other endangered species around the world. So before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name's Wendy Hapgood, and I'm from the wildlife conservation charity Wild Tomorrow Fund. We're based both in New York and on the ground in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, where we're saving habitat and wildlife. We also, as part of our wildlife protection program, work with other reserves where we equip rangers with training and equipment that's essential for them to be able to fight poaching so that they can protect animals that you love, like elephants, rhinos, and so many others. So tonight, unfortunately, you're going to hear that elephants across Africa are still in trouble and their populations are declining in most countries. So that's why it's so important, even here in New York and around the world, that we continue to fight for them by shutting down domestic ivory markets in the US and around the world. So before I introduce you to our amazing panel, I just wanted to let you know that through this event, for those of you who are joining us live, you can write comments and questions and we can bring them up on screen for our panel. So looking forward to hearing what you have to say as well. So let me bring in the panel. Firstly, we have Captain Jesse Paluch. He's leads the Environmental Crimes Bureau for New York State's Department of Environmental Conservation. In other words, he's basically a wildlife detective, which I think is truly an awesome job. And him and his team actually go undercover to conduct investigations on the illegal wildlife trade and other things. So thanks for joining us, Jesse.
Oh, you're welcome. Hi, Wendy, and hello, everyone else. It's great to be here.
And what kind? You get involved in all kinds of environmental crime or issues. What's sort of your mandate at the DEC?
We do. We have about 300 sworn police officers, and we're known as the Environmental Conservation Police. We've been around since 1880. We're actually the state's oldest state police agency. We enforce a myriad of environmental laws, everything from fish and wildlife enforcement of our native protected species to anything listed under the ESA, the Endangered Species Act. We also deal heavily with environmental crimes. We're out there to enforce environmental regulations to protect the state's natural resources, air, water, and other resources.
Amazing.
That's us.
That's fascinating. I think a lot of New Yorkers probably don't know what your department does, and they'll be happy to learn that there is like environmental police and detectives out there. Let's bring in Sue Orloff. So hi, Sue.
Hi, everybody.
Sue is the founder and president of Biologists Without Borders. It's a conservation charity focused mostly on conservation research, but also Sue's an internet detective behind the scenes researching and uncovering ivory for sale illegally, which we'll hear about tonight. So thanks, Sue. And we also are so lucky to have Sarah Walker joining us. Sarah's heads up the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance, which is now part of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Sarah, maybe you can introduce what the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance is all about.
Sure. We are a coalition of over 80 nonprofits, corporate entities in a variety of sectors, and AZA Zoos and Aquariums, of course, that are coming together and working together to raise awareness about wildlife trafficking, reduce demand, and work on the supply side, cutting off the supply chains in corporate America.
Amazing. It's really great to have such a diversity of organizations all fighting the same fight, really, for elephants and other threatened species. So before we sort of get into the detail, I wanted to start with giving a background for everyone in the audience tonight on global elephant numbers and the history of elephants and poaching and their decline. So when my grandmother was born in the 1920s, at that time, there were estimated to be around 10 million elephants in Africa. Now, by the time I was born in the late 70s, only 1.3 million elephants approximately remained. And that was the results of the first Pan-Africa survey of elephant populations done in 1979. By 1989, that population halved again and only 600,000 elephants remained. That's a staggering loss of 700,000 elephants in a decade, and that's really when the world stood up and started to take notice of, this disappearance of tragic disappearance of elephants from our planet, really because of demand for ivory, white gold. So in 1989, the international trade, commercial trade in African elephant ivory was finally banned under CITES, and populations started to recover. But then there were 2 legal sales of ivory, and demand increased again. And by 2013, sadly, according to a study done by Professor Wasser in the University of Washington, there may have been 50,000 elephants killed just in 2013 alone. In 2016, there was this amazing Great Elephant Census done where they took to the skies and literally counted elephants that remained to try to figure out how many were left. And unfortunately, and super shocking, in the 7-year period from 2007 to 2014, 1/3 of Africa's elephants were killed for ivory. That's 144,000 elephants killed in that 7-year period, which is so recent. That's what I thought was so shocking. So the killing of elephants for their ivory is not something that happened, in the past, in the 90s. It's actually happening today on our watch. So finally, governments around the world and states are working to protect elephants, bring down the shutters on this, the domestic ivory markets, and recognizing that the legal trade drives demand for ivory and gives cover for the illegal trade. So, Sarah, I mean, your organization looks across the board at the illegal wildlife trade globally. Can you give us some context of, how big this industry is?
Yeah, it's giant and continues to grow. Unfortunately, it's really become an international crisis at this point, and it's devastating not only animal species but human health, as we're now seeing with COVID-19, which I would love to touch on later.
Mm-hmm.
And although the African wildlife and the charismatic megafauna, of course, get most of the attention, this really is a global and worldwide problem. And the United Nations recent report explains that this is global in scope. Almost every country in the world is either an importer, an exporter, or a transit hub for illegal wildlife or illegal wildlife products. So it's everywhere, including in the United States. We play that role as both importer, exporter, and transit. And there have been some estimates that it's worth between about $7 billion and $23 billion. That's a huge range. It depends on what you count as wildlife, if you're including timber and fish. But what I can say is those numbers are really hard to pin down, because as Jesse can tell you, you only know what you know, and it's an illicit activity. And so we don't really know the exact scope and scale, but we do know it's one of the largest transnational crimes at this point, coming in fourth behind drugs, arms, and counterfeiting.
And to piggyback off of that, Sarah, the United States also falls as, when it comes to top ivory consuming countries, it's number 1 outside Asia, the United States. So it's important.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you may think that the horrors of elephant poaching are really far away. What does this have to do with New York? And I'm going to bring a picture up that's part of a presentation Jesse shows. So if you have kids, they may not want to look at this one. But, Jesse, what does this have to do with New York, when elephants are native to Africa and Asia? I mean, this is the horrific fate that they face because of ivory. Absolutely.
It has, unfortunately, a lot to do with New York, because the United States is so high ranked as a top ivory consuming country. And New York City being a major hub, being the largest city in the U.S., with just over 8 million people. It's a very diverse city. It also has the largest Asian population of any city outside of Asia. And it's also the wealthiest city in the world. The statistics go back and forth between between New York City and Hong Kong, but you take all of that and it's a recipe for disaster when it comes to the illegal wildlife trade and the populations of our wildlife.
Yeah, and what are the laws here, Jesse, around ivory in the United States?
In 2016, the U.S. government basically made an all-out ban on the trade in ivory. They took a really strong stance, which is great. Their stance on it now is with intrastate sales, so it's sales within state to state, or not state to state, within the state. I'm sorry. They don't regulate that if the article was legally possessed pre Appendix 1. So if the article was in their possession before 1990, when it was listed as a CITES Appendix 1 species, that piece can be sold intrastate, and there are no licenses that you need from the federal government. That being said, there are a number of states that do have their own licenses in addition to that, New York being one of them. When it comes to interstate sales, the federal law is that the piece must be an ESA antique, meaning it must be at least 100 years old, or the piece can be a de minimis value of volume, which means less than 50% volume of the total piece. So it can be one of those two things. When it comes to import and export, for commercial purposes, import of ivory is banned. Doesn't matter how old it is, doesn't matter how new it is, it's completely banned. For non-commercial purposes, ivory can still be brought into the States for a number of reasons or a number of exemptions, one of them being sport hunted trophies. Individuals are allowed 2 a year to import sport hunted trophies. Can't commercialize them, with them, but they can bring them in. Also, for scientific purposes or law enforcement purposes, there are certain exemptions. When it comes to exports, we allow the export for commercial trade, as long as, again, it's a pre-act piece. So that's the federal law. And when it comes to New York State's law, of course, we have to abide by the federal law, but we can always be more restrictive. And New York State has taken a great stance in that, and we are more restrictive. In 2014, we amended our state ivory and rhino horn laws and basically made an even stronger ban, saying that if you want to commercialize in an ivory article or a raw piece, a carved piece, that piece must be 100 years old or more, and it must also be of de minimis volume, again, sorry. And we're at 20%. So our law is even stricter, which is nice. And ever since that law was amended in 2014, it's allowed us to really enforce the regulations much better.
Which is great for elephants. And there's a question from Katie, how do you, it's very hard to know by looking at something how old it is. And often that's a way for unscrupulous people to pass off ivory that's actually maybe from freshly poached elephants. How do you and your team go about proving if a piece is actually antique, meaning at least 100 years old?
The burden of proof is on the applicant. So we allow for a license for a piece. Mm-hmm. If you meet an exemption and you want to sell the piece, let's say it's a 100-year exemption that you're trying to meet, you have to prove through provenance that the piece is at least 100 years old. That's not an easy thing to do, but through either literature or through purchasing receipts of some kind or through photographs, those are the types of things we're looking for prominence on a piece.
Great. So I think a lot of people, myself included, were quite surprised that New York City used to be one of the largest or the second largest city when it came to ivory sales in the world after China. Shocking. Why is that, Jesse? Why was New York such a hub for ivory?
Well, New York is a hub for everything. It really is. It's the borough of Queens is the most diverse city center in the world. It's the city itself has over 800 languages spoken. It's, it's a mecca. It really is just a melting pot of a city. That being said, it's also where most of the imports that are hitting the United States come through. So JFK, there's a statistic out there that 62% of all U.S. mail comes through JFK. So it's not that everything that's coming in is going to stay in New York, but it hits New York at some time. So, and whether it comes in illegally or legally, as soon as it's commercialized within the state, it's up to us to really crack down and enforce those regulations.
Right. And Sue, I think you were saying when we were talking earlier that maybe there's a misunderstanding that elephants are fine and protected, and that leads to some apathy.
Yeah, I don't know if it's apathy as much as ignorance, actually. I think if people actually knew how that ivory was acquired, they wouldn't buy it as readily. So I think making people aware is really important as well.
Absolutely. I think that's where the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance comes in, raising awareness with consumers and travelers.
Yeah, when we started 2015, we were looking at the data, and there was a survey that had been done shortly thereafter in 2016 by our partners at WildAid that showed 80% of the U.S. Public didn't know anything about wildlife trafficking. And if they did, it was very limited, probably specifically to elephants and ivory, but certainly didn't know the scope, the scale, what their purchases had to do with it. So we really looked at that data and thought to ourselves, we need to just simply raise awareness here in the United States that it's not a problem over in China. It's not just an Asia problem. It's not just an African wildlife problem. This is truly a global problem, and we have it here in our own backyard. So one of our first strategic pillars is to raise awareness about wildlife trafficking. And on our website, wildlifetraffickingalliance.org, you can find a lot of information. We have a Be Informed, Buy Informed campaign, which has a lot of great materials so that you can become an informed consumer and understand that your purchasing choices make a difference in the life of an animal.
Yeah. Many people don't even know you have to kill an elephant to get its ivory, and a brutal at that. And other people think the problem was solved years ago, or that it's strictly an Asian country problem. Actually, in the 2014 report, we were ranked second largest ivory market in the world, behind China. So it's gotten better since then.
So just to be clear, an elephant tusk is a tooth.
Yeah.
You really can't take that tusk without killing that animal. If the animal's not killed on the spot, it's going to die by infection at some point. It's not like a rhino horn, where a rhino horn is made of keratin, like your fingernail, and if it was taken off appropriately, it could grow back. With an elephant, that is not the case, and unfortunately, you have to kill the animal to harvest the tusk. And with elephants, they reach sexual maturity at the age of 10 to 12 years old. So they got to be at least a decade old before they can even reproduce. And in doing that, they are the mammal with the longest gestation period on Earth at 18 to 22 months. So, it's not like they're giving too much offspring. So.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, the way I met Jesse was when I was a university student at Columbia doing a story on
Wendy stopped in. Yeah. Yeah.
I was trying to, I was like, okay, I'll do a story on ivory in New York City. I really didn't think I would find anything. This is 2015, and I wanted to show you a picture of one of the stores. Actually, I found this on the internet. This was from 2014. You can see the ivory in the front window. What looks like ivory, maybe it's not, but there's a lot of white stuff there. And so I literally, in Manhattan, off Fifth Avenue, went and I went in some stores, and this is what I saw. And part of me, this was after New York passed the strict ivory laws. I couldn't really believe what I was seeing. A lot of items that looked like ivory. Here's another, right in the front window as well. This was for sale. And here's something upstairs. So actually, it was very easy then to find, this is 2015 and early 2016, to walk into a store here in the city, glitzy places, and there was ivory. So that's actually why I ended up meeting Jesse and giving him some information. But I think it's quite shocking, for someone to walk on the street and see this in their city. And that's, basically is one of the challenges with the ivory trade, because what happened for me was walking in the stores, they would say, well, this is mammoth. This is totally illegal. It's a long extinct animal, and most of us can't tell the difference, but there's a way. So let me bring up, I can test the audience here if you want to write in the comments. So here's an item. Let's say you saw this in a store. Does anyone have any idea? Do you think, if you looked at this, is this ivory?
Oh, me. Yes.
Jesse, what do you think looking at it?
I'm an expert at buying pieces like this, with money that's not mine. So I have to be very careful what I buy, of course, right? So if I buy the wrong thing, I own it. This piece, for those of you that don't know, the major characteristic we're looking for when we identify ivory is the presence of Schrager lines. Schrager lines are characteristic only to extant species or extinct species of either the mammoth or the Asian African elephant. And what you see with Schrager lines, what I mean is on the top of that apple, you can see what looks like snake skin. They're actually either convex or concave angles. So we're reading the degree on the angle once we orient the piece to find a cross section of it. So what you're seeing an ivory tusk that has been carved. And to orient that piece the correct way, you would actually look at the top of the apple where the stem is, straight down through the apple, and that is the cross section, and you can see those Schrager lines. So that is a piece of actual ivory. So,
made into an apple.
Yes.
So
if Sue, like she always does, sends me information on potential illegal sales of ivory, I'm looking online or I'm looking for the presence of Schrager lines in those photos, just like that.
All right, let's bring up another example because this one's interesting.
So
if anyone
those are also Schrager lines, Wendy, but what we're seeing is we're not seeing a cross section. We're actually seeing the tusk say up and down. So that's still characteristic ivory. It's just that the angles, when you're looking at it in a different way than a cross section, the lines aren't meeting each other in an angle.
So I know this one you had in your ID kit. Is this one is ivory? Sue knows the answer to this one.
Yeah, I do. I hate to contradict Jesse, but
go back on it. There's absolutely no way.
I believe these are not ivory. They're cellulose resins, and cellulose resins were actually invented to imitate ivory, and they have these regular lines on them, as opposed to ivory that has more irregular, sort of random growth rings. So in my opinion, these are resin. But this.
Wendy, can I have a rebuttal?
You may rebut. Yeah.
So I get you, and I know all about that.
Yeah.
If we pull the photo back together, the key word that you said was regular. So what you're seeing is they're not regular. Like you're right, cellulose has straight lines that resemble ivory, but they are always the same no matter what.
Yeah.
When you look at the number 6 die,
and
you look at the bottom left-hand corner,
that's true.
That side is the bottom side that you cannot see is the cross diameter of the tusk. And look how those angles on the bottom the lines are starting to curve to the left. So if you flip that die, you're going to have the angles. The number 5 and the other one could go either way, but if there were a set, chances are they're going to be ivory because that's an old set. Dice, cue balls, billiards balls, they were all piano keys, they were all made of ivory back in the day. But so were a lot of pieces of silverware that used cellulose. And it was actual silverware. and they would use that to mimic ivory. So that could go back and forth. I'd have to really feel the piece, and I'd have to see the price on the piece, and then I would more than likely take it to the American Museum of Natural History for a positive morphological identification. But I'd spend my money on that, Sue. I really would.
Well, this is a good time. As you can see, this is complicated, and what we try to do at the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance is inform you to be able to make these types of decisions. But bottom line, if you're in doubt, don't buy it. We don't expect you to all be wildlife biologists. This is what I do for a living, and I can't always tell if it's real or not. And there's ways to fake it. So if you're in doubt and you don't know, please just don't buy it.
Yeah. And Jesse, it'd be really fascinating to hear about your work, kind of busting people doing the wrong thing and selling what was actually elephant ivory illegally, you know, maybe saying it was mammoth or hippo or other things. So now it sounds like it should be a Hollywood movie title.
Well, thank you.
Can you tell us about Operation White Gold? Because we'd love to hear it.
It really was a proactive initiative we took in New York City. So at the time, I was in charge of 3 investigators, and it was a small team, the 4 of us. And with the new amended law, the strengthened law in 2014, it allowed us to go at a felony level in New York State against these sellers, these illegal sellers of elephant ivory and other products, which is great. So the law was strengthened all the way to a D felony for the illegal commercialization ivory over $25,000. Unfortunately, in New York City, you can quickly get to a $25,000 threshold, as you saw just in that picture. In that window, just 4 or 5 of those pieces is going to put you over 25,000. But what we would do is just some good police work, some investigative work 101, going in undercover and just taking a good look, verifying pieces, picking them up, touching them like anyone would if they were going to buy a $15,000 or $20,000 piece. No person in their right mind is going to buy a piece like that without touching it. So when the person that is a regular consumer is buying it, they're probably looking for cracks or any defects in the piece. They might also be positively identifying it as well. But when we're in there, we're doing the same thing, but we're looking to make sure it is what it is before we buy it. And do
you wear a disguise? Do you have a wire? Like, how does this go down?
You do the best you can to fit in. So it really depends on the circumstance. If you're going into a high-end store, you try to fit the part. If you're going into someone's home, you might want to dress that down a little bit. But we do what we need to do to capture all the evidence. So to record the transactions and to grab the audio and the video and to just build that evidence, that probable cause for possibly a pending search warrant to seize all those items, like you saw in that one picture that you took. Just after those pictures, I was already into that case, Wendy, when you went into that store. I had already established a rapport with the owners, and I had already bought multiple pieces. I spent tens of $1,000s in there. And that was all leading up to a seizure that we did in December of 2015, where we took $5 million price tagged ivory, off that one individual seller. So,
and I think it's funny because I personally thought, I gave Jesse some information after I went in the store because I was like, wow, if this is really ivory, it's definitely going to be millions of dollars worth. And, he told me, thank you, Wendy, we're going to investigate. And I was like, yes, but actually, Jesse and his team were already investigating, and he was probably thinking, who's this girl going to blow my cover if she writes a story about this? So
that's funny.
Yeah, it was quite an interesting.
Actually, we had a chuckle when you left because we were like, "Wow, she's really gonna, think she was the hero and everything else." And it was so funny. We were like, "Oh, we don't, as humans, we don't want to hold anything back. We're all good people. So when you come in and you talk to us for an hour about it, it's very hard not to say, hey, listen, we're all over it, Wendy. We really are." But the only thing I could tell you was thank you for the information, and we'll get back to you in the future. So, but it still worked out very well. And to get back to Operation White Gold, that was just one piece of the puzzle. We had executed 15 search warrants. We had seized a market value of $12 million during Operation white gold. We had seized tens of thousands of pieces, and I had personally looked at just about every single one of those pieces to make identifications. It was a phenomenal operation. It was something that started out small, and it just kept going through information that just kept coming our way. Whether it's great information from NGOs or non-governmental organizations like yourselves, or whether it was information from someone we had just arrested. The information just kept coming in, so the cases kept growing, which is good and bad. You don't want to see too many cases, obviously, because that means we have a problem. The good news is we had a drastic reduction in the amount of ivory post Operation White Gold because of it. And we had a phenomenal disposition rate at a 100% conviction rate, which is awesome. We ended up getting close to $250,000 in fines as part of conditional agreements, plea agreements. We were able to get donations to wildlife charitable organizations, and during Operation White Gold, that totaled about $500,000. And that ended in 2018. So we were able to give about $500,000 to groups like yourselves to go out there and fight on the front lines, which is pretty cool. And I just want to make it clear, we're still doing this. Mm-hmm. It is subsequent to Operation White Gold, but our men and women are still out there, and we're still getting information from people like yourselves, and we're still making great cases. And mm-hmm. our donations now have totaled almost $700,000.
Incredible.
To nonprofit organizations. So it's,
and what I love about that is, that money is coming from someone who did the wrong thing, and it's almost like they're being fined for.
And the money is specifically earmarked for wildlife conservation, and in a lot of cases, it goes straight back to the resource that was profited on. So that's really neat. And
we're having have some good questions coming in, and some of them. A lot on, what, and actually, Jesse, for you, this is a good question. How do you determine ultimately if it is really elephant ivory? Like when you go and buy a piece undercover, how do you tell?
I mean, I'm looking at it close up, right, with a monocle or a magnifying glass. I'm bringing a UV light in. I'm testing the weight of the piece. Cellulose is very light, very plasticky feeling. An ivory piece it feels dense. Those are the things we're doing to make the ID in the field. And then once we take the piece, we always bring it for a morphological identification from an expert. And in this case, in New York City, we use Dr. George Motto, who is the director of the Sackler Institute for Comparative Genomics. He's a wealth of information, and him and his team really make some positive morphological identifications for us. And if we need to take that a step further, let's say for trial or anything like that, we have the ability through his people to DNA test our samples. The issue with that is a lot of times it's destructive. So obviously the piece isn't ours, until they're proven guilty or something like that. So you're innocent until you're proven guilty. So a lot of times we won't use DNA testing on a piece because it will potentially hurt that piece.
Mm-hmm. And another great question, which leads into Sue's amazing work, is what do we do if someone is walking in the street and sees what they think is ivory? What can they do? Do they contact you, Jesse, or actually even better, Sue? This is a great opportunity for you to explain and introduce your Eye of Elephant app. There's an app for that, everybody.
There's an app for that, yes. And I actually got the idea from Wendy, who went into this store in New York and found ivory and reported it to Jesse, and it resulted in a huge bust. And so I figured other people could do this as well if they just need a mechanism for doing so. So that's how Eye of the Elephant was born. It basically allows you to report where ivory is being sold. And it's pretty straightforward. You just, through the app, take a picture, you write down the description, GPS the location, and then I send those reports onto Jesse or whoever state they belong to investigate and prosecute. And because there's ivory bans now in some of the top selling ivory states, many sellers have gone underground or to the internet to sell their wares because it's a lot safer. So I've also been doing daily internet searches for online vendors and auction sites that are selling ivory. And then I send these to the various authorities as well. And this is the third year I've been collecting this data and sending it on.
Well, and let me put up a screenshot here, Sue. This is the app, and actually we'll put in the comments where you can go to download it for iPhone or Android. It's called Eye of the Elephant, and then you'll see here, this is a sample like map where you can see where people have reported what could be ivory. Is that
right? It's one of the pages on the app, and it just gives you an overview of where the reports have come in. I mean, the one to the left is all of U.S., gives you an overview. You blow it up a little bit, that's the East Coast, where the majority reports. Blow it up even further, where Jesse and his team busted a bunch of stores based on a tip from Eye of the Elephant. So thanks to Jesse and his team, we've had 6 other successful prosecutions.
Yeah, it is important.
And we're now going to be offering. Pardon?
Oh, it's important to say that like Sue's information is statewide. It's not just New York City. And we've made some great cases based on Sue's information in the city of Rochester, city of Hudson, and other points upstate. So
basically, Sue's app is empowering everybody out there to be wildlife detectives and to help wildlife. If you see something, say something, report it. And the great thing is if you can do it safely with your phone and take a photo, that's even better. This is a recent one, which is just so off Fifth Avenue. It's difficult to believe after all these news about the big busts and the crush, that this was in the front window. So someone actually anonymously reported this one to Sue, and it did result in
just last year. Fairly recently. And we're now going to be offering a reward for people who send in reports that lead to successful prosecutions. So we're going to be incentivizing it a little bit more.
That's great, Sue. Yeah, that Tusk in a window, we took care of that as soon as Sue gave me that information. And there was more than just that Tusk in the window. So there was more.
Something I wanted to show was, Jesse, you were talking about Operation White Gold, and it was this massively successful operation. Remove, was it $8 million worth of ivory off the street?
8 million was from that one large bust because as a term of their plea agreement, they actually donated more ivory to us that was not seized during the search warrant. So that totaled 8 million, but it was 12 million total if you count all the cases.
So let me show you. This was a video that shows actually the scale of this seizure, and thanks to DC. I'll just show this clip. It's got Jesse in it.
Got it.
One's over there. Oh, awesome. And then that cart was the other one. Awesome.
I thought we would start with just a little visioning here. Just take a moment to imagine what 100 elephants looks like. So what that looks like after the poaching trade is what is in this room right now. 2 tons of ivory, a street value of $8 to $10 million. Think about that, right? How do these pieces get into this room? It starts in very wild places in Africa where you have elephants roaming, and gangs, not hunters, gangs and terrorists gun down elephants indiscriminately, 96 of them on a daily basis. And then they literally tear the ivory, the tusks, out of these elephants using chainsaws and machines. And then, with their shady gangs, finding ways to move this material out of Africa through smuggling networks, transportation networks overseas, through ports and somehow into places like New York City, a cosmopolitan city, one of the real centers of the world. So-called art dealers that run operations and sell fine art on 57th Street or somewhere in central middle of Manhattan. They have these back rooms where they make these deals, and our team gets in there. They establish a level of trust with the dealers, and we go from there with the prosecutions.
How's it make you feel, Jesse, seeing that again, living that moment behind the boss?
Yeah, proud.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see that on a multitude of levels, people can make a difference, because this is a systemic problem, that starts obviously, on the front lines, but the U.S. just plays a role in the demand for this product, and we see it on our streets. We don't see it on our streets as a live elephant. We see it as a carved tusk. Mm-hmm. And in my view, a carved tusk is worthless. I think that tusk is worth a lot more on the elephant.
What was that?
Right.
I was just going to say, as long as there's a demand, there's going to be somebody out there that's going to fill that demand. Much like the drug trafficking. This habit is a lot easier to break, so it's basically on us.
Yeah, and I have one other short video I want to show. It's all culminated in a big crush of ivory in Central Park, where the ivory was destroyed and the public was there, and Jesse, that was really to send a message that ivory should have no value, right? That it's
exactly. I mean, it's really sending. We wanted to make a huge public statement, right, to get the word out there, and just to emphasize that New York does not condone the illegal wildlife trade, does not condone illegal elephant ivory trade, and that's for sure.
Let me show this video. The song in the background was sung by our friend Schubert in Tanzania, an elephant advocate and conservationist, and he's singing about why there should be no ivory trade. So that's the background. Here we go.
Presence of legal ivory markets, support illegal markets. That's why we call for CITES Appendix 1. The survival of these species is in our heart. Stand up and say no to ivory. Let us stand up and say no to ivory. From the ivory trade, stand up, say no to ivory. Timber wetu, urithi wetu, our elephants, our heritage. Tusimame kwa pamoja kukomesha biashara hii. No more delay, no more mistakes. Time for action, not extinction. Stand up and say no to ivory. Together we can.
I love that song by Schubert. He's saying, stand up and say no to ivory. And it was very moving, actually. And to see people, members of the public, were able to pick up a piece and put it on that crusher and be a part of it. And actually, after that, we had people, I know you did too, Jesse, ask, how can I hand in my ivory? I have a piece from my grandmother, can I get it crushed? And I think that's an initiative that the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance is actually doing now with zoos. Is that right, Sarah?
That's right. Yes, we have an initiative called Toss the Tusk. Say that 10 times fast. But we have zoos across the United States hosting Toss the Tusk events where you can bring in your unwanted ivory. And we have state wildlife inspectors there to be able to answer those questions for you. Is this real ivory? Some people received good news that it wasn't real and they could take it home if they wanted. But we, last year alone, collected over 700 individual pieces of not just ivory, but illegal wildlife products that were turned in, tiger skins, all sorts of things that people had in their attics and basements. So you can visit wildlifetraffickingalliance.org/toss the tusk. We have not announced our 2020 dates. Obviously, AZA Zoos and Aquariums gates are not open right now, but we will be announcing another set of those events. And I'd love to host one in New York, Jesse. So we will be chatting.
Yeah, let's keep in touch on that. I think that is a noble thing to do. It really is. And to answer that question, we're creating awareness when we do an ivory crush, right? And New York wasn't the first to do an ivory crush. Across the globe, they do ivory burns, they do ivory crushes. We're just one of many spots, but we're creating awareness. And just like Sarah said, from that, people are now saying they're opening their eyes to it and saying, wow, I've got that in my basement, or I've seen this somewhere. Can I turn it in, or what can I do? So I think that to answer that question about, is it worth it? Is it doing anything? I'd say yes, definitely.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that citizen engagement piece, which is why I love Sue's app so much, is really important. And people want to know what they can do, and they can't all be a wildlife detective like Jesse. Although I encourage you all to do it because it's a noble profession and we need more of them, and more funding, but he can't tell you that. But it's really a great way to be able to help and to ensure that it never ends up on the market. The last thing we want is somebody to be cleaning out grandma's attic and then post a bunch of products on eBay. eBay is a Wildlife Trafficking Alliance partner and doing, they're not perfect, but they're doing a lot of great stuff to try and keep illegal products off their site. But if somebody doesn't know and posts things on eBay, then they have a problem and they're trying to get it off. And let's just make sure that it stays off the market. There is no value. And as Jesse said, it's absolutely raising awareness about the plight of elephants.
Yes. And to that end, everyone can be a force multiplier. Unfortunately, in the DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, we've only got a handful of investigators in New York City. To put it into perspective, NYPD's got upwards of 40,000, 24,000 of which are on the street, right? We've got 4 enforcing environmental crimes or fish and wildlife crimes, trafficking crimes in New York City. We've got 25 in the entire state of New York. So we don't have strong numbers, but we do have a strong will. So if you guys do have information, please get it to us either through an organization like Biologists Without Borders and their Eye of the Elephant app, or specifically in New York City, I'll throw a phone number out there. You can call our Long Island City Dispatch, which is 718-482-4885. You can contact our police officers right there, and they will take the information readily. So,
which is how I met Jesse the first time. I called the hotline.
Yes. Yes.
I want to just say another really great thing to do if you're looking for a way to help is if you live in New York, call your representative, legislative representative, and tell them that you support more funding for wildlife enforcement, and tell them why and why.
Absolutely. Yes.
I want to put up this picture because I think it's a real Hollywood kind of picture. This is from Jesse. Can you tell us about this picture, Jesse? And was this Operation White Gold kind of the highlight of your career so far?
Yes. Yes. I'd like to say in my 20 years, I've had quite a few highlights, but this definitely ranks among the top. What you're looking at is some seized elephant ivory tusks that we posed with on the rooftop of our building. So the backdrop is Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan, and you can see that it was around Christmas because the Empire State Building is lit up like a Christmas present. That was December 28th of 2015, shortly after the state's largest seizure of elephant ivory. So, and that was the team that executed the search warrant.
Amazing. What a great team. And, I think it's a great story that it's your team, but also relying on the public to send information and report where they see ivory. So together, we're
Yes.
all empowered to help elephants. Something that we haven't touched on yet, but I think is important is, New York was able to close this market because it has strict state laws that bans not just elephant ivory, but mammoth ivory. So that loophole, where the dealer would say to me, oh, this is fine, this is not illegal, this is mammoth, but truly who knows, and sometimes it was actually elephant ivory. So closing that loophole and bringing in strict laws in, was it 2014, Jesse, is why New York was able to really crack down on ivory sales in the state.
Yeah.
What is it, and actually, Sue, I think you can answer this, like, what is the situation in the United States, and how many states have ivory laws or strict ivory laws?
Yeah, there's only 10 states right now that have ivory bans. I think you have a slide for that.
Yep.
New York and New Jersey were one of the first in 2014, and then last year, New Hampshire and Minnesota joined the troops. And I'm currently working with the Humane Society and wildlife agents from some of the top-selling ivory states to facilitate the enactment of bans in those states as well. And there's several states that have proposed legislation, but they haven't been enacted yet, so they just need a little push through. And DC, District of Columbia, has just passed an ivory ban that's supposed to take effect shortly. And there, as Jesse mentioned, there's a strict federal ban that was enacted in 2016. It's really hard to prosecute federally because the feds need to prove either interstate commerce or importation into the country, which you'd think would be obvious, but it's hard to prove. So having a state ban really makes it much more straightforward for the agents to go after these people.
Let me bring everyone back here. Yeah, and I think that's also where, if you see legislation up for consideration, and where people can be empowered to really call their state representatives to say, yes, I care about ivory. Because I know there was several cases where, like Washington State, people tried for elephants twice, and it was rejected until actually Paul Allen from Microsoft kind of paid for a massive publicity campaign to get signatures so that it would go to ballot, and then the elephants sort of won by a landslide, and ivory laws were able to come into effect in Washington State. But if it wasn't for the elephant lovers, signing a petition, it wouldn't have happened. And that's also, the antique lobby is quite strong, and also the NRA, because it's ivory and guns, and so there are people out there pushing to prevent strong ivory laws by state. So that's where if you believe, like we do, that stopping the ivory trade domestically helps protect elephants from poaching, and you can use your voice and sign those petitions when it comes up.
When do you want to bring up that slide of the U.S. From my recent report? Because that'll show you where the top-selling ivory states are, in case you want to start your own grassroots campaign or write some letters.
This one where you found online?
Yeah, this is from a report where I summarized a year's worth of data collection, both from the app and my internet searches. And the darker blue are where there's more sellers of ivory. And as you can see, it's a lot of it's on the East Coast. Florida is a big culprit. Pennsylvania, Virginia, Massachusetts, Ohio. California is still in the running, even though we do have an ivory ban here, but it's much reduced, as New York is much reduced. So those are the top states. If you'd like to go write some letters, those are the ones to do it for.
Amazing.
It's interesting to see that Pennsylvania was as high as California, and that could have a lot to do with the fact that it's illegal in New York, but that Pennsylvania shares a border with New York, and it's legal there. So we do see that a lot. We have strong law in New York, and if it's legal somewhere that's close, that's where they'll go. So that's interesting.
Yeah, we lost Sarah momentarily, her internet. What I think is amazing to see is that, these, as you're closing the domestic markets, New York is one of the earliest ones in the US with strict laws. Other countries are following suit. So we're seeing China close its domestic market. I believe Hong Kong committed to close their domestic market by 2021. So around the world, there's this movement to kind of do similar things to what New York has done, and New Jersey, California, and implement strict laws. And I think, Jesse, your department was called from has had calls from around the world asking, how New York did it.
A number of times, yeah. I mean, most recently, California. I still talk to California probably once every couple of months, but years ago when they were forming like a strike force to deal with this, they reached out to us to see where we saw ivory, what types of markets, and just to pick our brains on our operations, because California, major cities in California, they had very similar issues.
Right. Be great to have some time. I'll actually bring up, there's a lot of praise here from our live viewers. What a great job you've done here in New York State. We all agree. And how, what can we do to get more states to enact legislation? I think when other states, I actually don't know the answer to that. You need campaigns and people to sign ballots and really have the elephant lovers need their voice to be heard, instead of the lobbyists. There was the question, how many states have laws? It was 10, right, Sue?
Yeah.
10. I mean, next door here in Connecticut, you could sell ivory, technically speaking. So,
And internationally, when I've been searching the net for the last 3 years, I found many Western countries, the UK, Europe, Australia is a biggie, also have large markets. And so I've started to collect data on the UK as well, because they just passed a very strict ivory ban there, and it's about to go into effect. So I've contacted the agencies there, and I will be sending that data on to them as well.
Amazing.
Wendy, I'd like to bring up a point that elephant ivory it's a lucrative trade. Ivory is literally worth its weight in gold. At the height of it, over this last decade, it used to be estimated at about, this is black market numbers, at about $2,100 per kilogram. So that's every 2.24 pounds. That number, ever since the China ban, has gone down to about $750 per kilogram, but it's still very lucrative for organized crime syndicates to get involved in. And the plight of the elephant is still real. It really, to this day. So I wish we had some poaching statistics out there, but I know that the Wildlife Conservation Society, years ago, were saying that upwards of 100 elephants a year. 100 elephants a day.
Right.
Fell victim to poaching, and they had the 96 elephant campaign. So,
Right. And I think it's also, we've talked a lot about ivory tonight, but the illegal wildlife trade in general is, this huge issue and destroying biodiversity around the world. So I know we lost Sarah. She's kind of connecting back in, but let me show a video, because the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance raise awareness about all wildlife trafficking. So let me show you a quick clip from them.
If you believe wild things belong to all of us, if their fate matters to you, if you think someone should protect them, hear this now. That someone is you. The desire to own something rare and unusual has become a death sentence for hundreds of millions of animals. Every year, Americans often unknowingly fuel the multi-billion-dollar illegal wildlife trade by bringing these items into the United States. You have the power to stop it. Ask before you buy to make sure your purchase doesn't harm endangered species. Be informed. Buy informed. Find out more at uswta.org.
That's great video, Sarah.
Yeah, very moving, Sarah.
Yeah, our friend Ed Norton was very generous with his time to shoot that while he was in New York. So we're very grateful to him for doing that.
Amazing. Actually, I have a question that came in that I think is a good one for you, Sarah. And what can we do because of COVID-19? You know, is the wildlife trade? You know, I was hopeful that it was getting more attention because the links to pangolins and the trafficking of pangolins, the most trafficked animal in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that link to this human pandemic, but you know, there's a lot of human needs and suffering right now, and how will that impact our fight for animals?
Yeah, that's a really good and timely question, obviously. And in fact, I know that you're not seeing it in the public zeitgeist right now, but it has increased attention to this issue in the conservation community. And I'm hopeful that once COVID begins to lessen its wrath for a multitude of reasons, we can start to have that conversation with the public about why this happened and how we can prevent this from happening before. Certainly, illegal wildlife trade isn't the only thing we need to combat to reduce the public health risk for zoonotic diseases. But illegal wildlife trade is one of those areas that we need to continue working on to, when you're dealing with an illicit activity like this, you're circumventing laws, you're circumventing quarantine laws, you're going around all legalities. The animals are in tight quarters. If you're shipping them live, they're not following regulations. So illegal wildlife trade has a huge role to play in preventing future pandemics. And I do want to say too that we recently went out in the field with a public opinion survey in the U.S. and we were a little bit behind on our timing, and I'm glad that it worked out the way it did, because we were actually in the field with the survey at the height of the COVID problem, and we were in the field late March, early April. And it did show that there was an increased awareness about it. And the message that we tested on the public health risk of illegal wildlife trade ranked very, very high. And I'd like to say that we probably wouldn't have even had a message on zoonotic diseases linked to illegal wildlife trade prior to the pandemic. And certainly it wouldn't have ranked second as the highest message. So it is having an impact. And I know that we're not quite seeing it now. I don't know that now's the right time to be having that conversation with the public, because people are still dying in such large numbers, but guaranteed that the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance, our conservation partners, we're all mounting campaigns, and we will be coming out and hitting it pretty hard. So just be waiting.
Stay tuned. Well, we're kind of at a time where we should wrap up, and I want to thank everyone for joining us live, and also our amazing panel. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. You know, I'm really proud of New York City. We're getting a lot of comments as well, you know, about Jesse and his team, and, you know, people really pushing to close down the ivory market here in New York. So it's great to see it happening across the US and internationally. You know, and elephants are not alone. Many other species around the world are at risk. So I hope everybody can download Sue's app and report if you see, you know, see something, say something, and be vigilant. And if you're in doubt, don't purchase an item that could be made from an endangered species. So before we say goodnight, it'd be great if each speaker has like a final message for everyone. Sue.
Yeah, just hopefully people can be a part of the solution and join the fight, and download my app. And yeah, it's hard to do it with brick and mortar stores right now with the shutdown, but certainly you can search the internet like I have been doing, and be a part of the solution.
Great. And Sarah, what's your message for the audience tonight?
The quickest and most direct way to stop poaching of elephants is to stop the demand. And we have come a long way. Elephants are doing a lot better than they were a few years ago, but we're still losing more than they can reproduce. So we have a long way to go, and your choices matter. When you shop, when you're online, when you're in the stores, when you're traveling, be informed, buy informed, and visit wildlifetraffickingalliance.org to learn how you can be an informed consumer.
Amazing. And Jesse?
I'm going to piggyback off Sue. I believe that we should be part of the solution, not the problem. We as human beings have enormous powers. We have immense influence over the world and what that world becomes. And I really think that, we have to be the voice for these animals, that we can and that we should speak for those that cannot speak for themselves.
And you have a great quote. I'm going to put it on the screen. You can tell everybody, your words.
We must not sit idle and allow our world's beloved species to fade into a premature extinction. We may not win the war waged against our wildlife, but we must not give in. To battle against poaching and defend those that cannot defend themselves is noble and just.
It's amazing. Thank you, Jesse. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us live. And before we go, I'm going to give a plug. Wild Tomorrow Fun on Saturday, June 6th, we're having a big event, a virtual event. You can come on safari with us, meet our newest, cutest arrival, a little baby giraffe. There'll be an auction, comedians, entertainment, and more. So really hope you can join us. And by joining us and buying your ticket, you'll be helping us to keep doing our work, saving wildlife in wild places. So hope you can. And thanks, everyone.
That's great. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.